Earlier today, I sat down with Rochester Police Chief Jim Franklin, who has been leading the police force locally for more than 2 years now. And a lot that has transpired over the last year, from recruiting new police officers to his department, to the laws that have changed and that are changing right now across the country. As we look back on this last year, a lot has changed, a lot hasn't. What would you say would be the most specific, or specifically, what do you think has been some of the biggest changes that you've seen?
Yeah, so last year, or the last 12 months have been significantly challenging for law enforcement, obviously. But it's also given us an opportunity within law enforcement to take a hard look in the mirror and say, what are the things that we're doing well and where do we need to make some improvements? And so over the last several months, we in the Rochester Police Department have been looking at the way we do business from 5 primary lenses. One is, our hiring practice, our training procedures, our policy manual, the supervision that we have on the street, and then accountability and discipline. And so we've taken a look at all of those things internally and said, where can we make improvement in alignment with our organizational philosophy of being an agency dedicated to continuous improvement?
So I was thinking about what we would talk about, because we have talked a number of times since this has happened, which, by the way, I thank you for that, because a lot of people would shy away and they don't want to talk about this, especially those in law enforcement, and you never have. You and I look at racism through a way different lens than other people. I have to imagine you see things differently now, a year after the death of George Floyd, as maybe you did years before while you were still in law enforcement.
Yeah, so we've always been an agency that's valued engaging the public at the highest possible level, and I think we've done that. Obviously, we've been hindered in our efforts with COVID for the last several months, as has everybody across the country and across the world. But so we're very much looking forward to turning back on that community engagement. But that's really where it starts, is being willing to come to the table, have the conversations with people, and see life from different perspectives.
How do we do that? Because I listen to the conversations, and we can't change our skin color. We can't change the lens through which we view life. I can see law enforcement in one way. You're going to see it completely different, although our paths intersect a lot. Trying to look at racism in this country from my perspective is a lot different now than it was more than a year ago. Is it different for you, or do you still see things the way that it's been and just the need for change?
So I look at it as there's 2 parts to the equation. Number one, it comes down to this. No matter who you're dealing with, right? And it doesn't matter if you're dealing with the guy living in the street or the guy working on Wall Street. There's a universal truth out there, and that's people want to be treated with respect. And that's one of the things that we pound home with our officers here.
And you did that before last year.
Absolutely, yeah. We've been talking that philosophy. Every contact counts, getting out there, policing with your hearts. And I truly believe that that's the way we do business here in the city of Rochester with the Rochester Police Department. But there's 2 prongs to the equation, in the fact that we've got to tear down these barriers and these obstacles where people just see the blue uniform, the badge in the uniform, and automatically brand law enforcement negative. Cops do a lot of good for the community. And what's important to recognize here is the cops here in Rochester, these are your neighbors. You see them at the grocery store. You see them, they coach football, they coach hockey, they coach wrestling. So not only do they serve this community as public servants in the policing capacity, but they also serve the community in those other variety of activities embedded within the community. And I think it's important to have that at the forefront of our minds.
At this point, I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, we have to touch on recruitment, because I know that that's been hard.
Yeah.
But also a conversation I just recently had with my dad that is important, not just to me, but to this whole conversation. Just 2 minutes. Continuing now with my conversation from earlier today with Rochester Police Chief Jim Franklin about all that has come about in the last year since the death of George Floyd. Things on the local level are a lot different than like they are up in the Twin Cities, yet the trickle-down effect from all that has happened has hit departments nationwide. My dad and I were talking recently about the workforce. The argument comes in, is it about the diversity, is that being hammered home more than it is about people who are qualified? And this is a hard position to put you in, but at the same time, the recruits are not as plentiful as they used to be. You have to have a diverse department, but you also want good, qualified officers. How do you balance all of that?
Yeah, so we've made significant enhancements in our hiring process in the last several years, and we've taken, I take great pride in that. And so we're looking for men and women of character and integrity first, and then I'll train them to standard later. And that's a little bit of a shift. In addition, one of the things that we've done that I'm very proud of is we have included community members as part of our interview panel, and diverse community members, not only hiring new officers, our frontline employees, but also on our promotional panels. And if you think about that, why is that important? And it goes back to those Sir Robert Pelian principles of the police of the public and the public of the police. I'm inviting the public in and saying, help me pick the next leaders, help me pick the next generation of officers and shape this organization moving forward. Now, with that said, without a doubt, there is, quite frankly, I'll use this word, there is a crisis coming in law enforcement, and that is hiring. There is a dramatic deficit of people that want to be police officers. That can be attributed to a wide array of factors, primarily probably the national narrative and the negativity towards law enforcement. And it takes a special character, it takes a very strong-minded officer to ignore the negative and focus on the positive, which is what we are pounding home with our officers and supporting our officers internally. Now, with that said, I will also say what gives me hope is the fact that the candidates and the people that are applying for the job today,
they must have a real passion like maybe you haven't seen.
They have a heart, and they have a passion and a calling to this profession. So that gives me hope in amidst the storm here, literally and figuratively, I guess. But there is going to be significant challenges in law enforcement moving forward for the hiring process.
Last week, I sat down with Sheriff Torgerson, and he said, Betsy, this is something you want to look into. Go find out how many students are enrolled at our local community college where the kids, the pool that we have to recruit from.
Yeah.
11.
Yeah.
Whereas this should be in the dozens, we have 11. And so you say that the crisis is somewhere down the line. It looks like the crisis is here now because you've got people retiring and people saying, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah, so we're certainly seeing that across the board, kind of nationwide, and also in the state of Minnesota, people hanging it up a little early. And that, along with just the lack of applicants, has created this issue.
I have a son who just turned 16. He's a new driver. Never had to have that conversation with him. You have your own kids, but because you're a cop, you probably have that conversation with them. And I keep thinking, do I need to have that talk with them? What happens when you get pulled over? My parents never had that talk with me. What would you suggest? Because I think my child is pretty respectful, and I think that if he gets pulled over, he just knows to be respectful. And that's what it boils down to locally. Cops keep saying, just be respectful. Do what we ask you to do.
Yeah, so as a father of two brand new teenage drivers in my home, I can sympathize a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I actually have had that conversation with my kids. And the advice I give my kids is what I would tell any parent is, you know, whatever you're asked to do, cooperate. If the officer asks for your license, give it to them and cooperate with the officer. If there's injustice there, or if the officer was rude, or now is not the time, that's not the time to argue. We'll deal with that later, but understand, you know, that the officer doesn't know what they're walking up to. They don't know who's in the car. They don't know if there's any threats in the car. And we'll deal with the other issues, the complaints, later, if there are any. And I think for my cops, what I tell the cops is, you've got to remember, you know, cops kind of get into the groove of their work. And this might be their 9th or 10th traffic stop of the night. But what sometimes we forget in law enforcement is this may be your first time being stopped. Not you personally, but this might be your first time being stopped. And again, we kind of forget that. That the other side of that interaction, and we need to be mindful of that. So that's something that I specifically try to kind of pound home with, especially the new officers, is, you know, we don't want people walking away feeling like they were mistreated.